They believe it to be man's greatest weapon against the devil.
Coming out of Babylon, Babylon, Babylon.
Spiritually, mentally, physically.
Coming out of Babylon.
Fleeing from her iniquities.
We coming out of Babylon, Babylon, Babylon.
Spiritually, mentally,
Peace and blessings on the ancient Hebrew tongue. Shalom Lakah. Your brother Shofar Tamim Ban Yasha Allah coming to you today with a very, very quick presentation to recognize Christopher Columbus Day. To take a quick look at the historical account of the celebration of Christopher Columbus and his discovery of the Americas. Many will be celebrating this day in honor of what the Spaniard Christopher Columbus did in allegedly finding the Americas. We have been taught in traditional schools that Christopher Columbus indeed found or discovered the Americas, paving the way for the Europeans to come over and colonize this place and create and build one of the most massive empires the world has ever seen. But this is something to really historically think about. How can one discover a land where there were already inhabitants? But let's open up with the scripture, with the book of John chapter 8, and we'll go to the 32nd verse. Let's see something very profound that the Lamb, the true and living Messiah, the Mashiach, let's see what he had to say. The book of John chapter 8 verse 32, and it reads, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Again, many are going to knowingly celebrate the day of Christopher Columbus Day, or a holiday set aside to honor this Spaniard coming over here to conquer this land. Some won't work tomorrow. Many states will close down services, so on and so forth, in honor of this day. But let's take a look at something historically and see, where did this come from? And is this thing historically proper to respect and honor? Christopher Columbus Day is a national holiday that celebrates the arrival of Christopher Columbus in October the 12th of 1492. He was commissioned by Isabella, Queen Isabella, and Ferdinand, rulers of the Spanish monarchy, funded to come and find a quicker route to India, as he thought. What he ended up doing was running into the Western Hemisphere, into what's known or became known as the Americas. Okay? When he landed, eventually this day became known as Dia de la Raza, or the Day of the Race. That should make you think, what are they racing for? What was the European racing to do? To conquer the known world. Because as we'll read further on, they are the fourth beast that was prophesied to conquer the entire planet and break it into pieces. And that's exactly what has manifested. This day was also and is also celebrated as a day of respect in Belize, Uruguay, and other places in South America. A day of respect for cultural diversity. This is very, very interesting because historically, Christopher Columbus did not come over here to promote cultural diversity. He came over here to promote the ideals and mindset of the Roman beast, the Roman Catholic Church, and the various monarchies that was established during the revived Roman Empire. This is what he came to promote, the manifest so-called destiny. In 1934, the Christopher Columbus celebration was made a federal holiday by Mr. President Roosevelt at the behest of the Knights of Columbus. Now, in order for you to understand how important this is, the Knights of Columbus are a branch of Secret Service for the Vatican. That's right. So they actually commissioned the President of the United States of America to make this a federal holiday honoring what Christopher Columbus has done in finding this place, and not just finding it, but actually conquering the known inhabitants of this land. Secretly, Christopher Columbus, in his memoirs and diaries, went to Ferdinand and went to his so-called Queen Isabella, looking for the 10 tribes and in hopes that they would give them funding to go find the 10 tribes. This is one of his secret missions that many are not taught about, but this can be found again in his memoirs. Coincidentally, Christopher Columbus Day also lines up with what's celebrated in Canada as their day of Thanksgiving. But Canada is also under the crown of the Queen, who sits on a seat of the Roman Empire as well that we know today. So, with this being stated, what is really going on here? What is actually being celebrated? Think about this. The Spanish to this day actually celebrate this as Dia de la Hispanidad, okay? Or a day that emphasizes, puts stress on the fact that many cultures or many lands throughout this earth are now under Spanish influence. That's right. The so-called Mexican, Cuban, and South American Hispanic that speaks the Spanish language but may not be of Spanish origin by blood have actually been conquered and now have taken on the culture and mindset of those Europeans that came over and conquered this land. The original people of South America, whether it be the Arawaks, whether it be the Taíno, so-called Indians that were originally in those lands, were conquered by the Spanish under the hands of Christopher Columbus and the conquistadors that followed. So, with that being stated, that's not your original language or tongue. And on top of that, they brought slaves from the west coast of Africa to help build up South America, Central America, and eventually North America. So with that being stated, how can we, as being the children of slaves, or being children of the indigenous peoples that inhabited this land, how can we honor this day? We shouldn't, if you really think about it. And the European that is honest, the European that knows proper history, also shuns and looks at this day in complete disrespect. Why? Well, let's see.
Christopher Columbus was the ISIS of his day. He justified rape, murder, and pillage with religion, and he funded his efforts with whatever he could steal. Today, while millions across America are celebrating Columbus Day, the city of Seattle is celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. That's because last week, the Seattle City Council unanimously passed a resolution to honor the contributions and cultures of Native Americans on the second Monday of October. While Seattle's decision may seem unusual, it's actually part of a growing trend. Many cities and states across the country have shifted away from celebrating Columbus Day, and that's because more and more Americans are learning the real history behind Christopher Columbus and his so-called discovery. First of all, Columbus didn't actually discover the Americas, despite what you may have been taught in elementary school.
Let's see what Christopher Columbus was actually about. We're going to read an historical account found in a book written, not just a coincidence, by a very intellectual and well put together author by the name of Mr. Frank Zaquan Jordan. Okay? This book again is titled, Not Just a Coincidence, What Pastors, Politicians, Leaders Fail to Tell You. Now it's found on page 65. Let's read a historical account. Let's see something. And it reads, for the people of the Americas, the arrival of Columbus was hardly a blessing. On his first day, October 12, 1492, the explorer wrote this in his diary. I took some of the natives by force. Think about that. Now they paint a picture And our educational system that has been taught to us as children, that is sincerely still being taught to our children today, that Christopher Columbus came over along with the so-called pilgrims and shook hands with the Indians, broke bread, and everything was fine. But this is not what Christopher Columbus, nor the pilgrims, nor any of those conquistadors that came to this land were really about. They were about conquering, rape, murder, and pillage.
Invader. He got lost coming here, and he's the one that named us Indians because he thought he was in India. So he's not a good figure to the native community.
The atrocities committed, just grotesque. And the scars are still felt.
He's the first terrorist in America, that's for sure.
So according to the U.S. government law, it says if you partake in somebody that's stealing, then you're just as guilty. Everybody knows the United States was stolen. So therefore, all those that are original, that knows about the genocide, the rape, the murder, the theft, the putting on the reservations on a rock that they couldn't survive on, they're going to have to face judgment.
But let's continue on. He later found the inhabitants to be tractable, peaceful, and concluded there is not in the world a better nation. That's right. When Christopher Columbus encountered the original indigenous people of this land, these people were of peace. Yes, our so-called Indian brothers were very much so warriors, but they were about peace. They would treat strangers with love. You know why? Because it's found in our laws to do so. Christopher Columbus and those conquistadors took very much so advantage of their nature. But let's continue on. His response as a European was to say that Indians must, notice this, must be made to work and adopt our ways. Children are torn from their distracted parents, parents from their screaming children, wives from their frantic husbands, husbands from their violated wives, brothers from their loving sisters, so on and so forth. Now this was an excerpt that was quoted from the book The Black Indians by Mr. William Lorenz Katz. Now this is very interesting because it said that Mr. Christopher Columbus said that Indians must be made to work and adopt our ways. This was indeed the mindset of those conquerors that came over here. And when the European puts this into federal holiday and celebrates this, this is the very ideal that he is indeed celebrating. But again, you have honest so-called Europeans that will admit that this day should not get any honor and that it is really honoring wickedness.
What the heck, America? Why are we still celebrating Columbus Day? We are taught in school that we celebrate Columbus Day because he discovered the Americas. In actuality, he didn't discover the Americas. There was already millions and millions of people here already. Children textbooks in school leave out all the horrific atrocities committed by Christopher Columbus. Why do the Americas celebrate and glorify a day of a man who was evil? It doesn't even make sense. Christopher Columbus was a dishonest and greedy mass murderer. He was a torturer and a rapist. He enslaved native people and forced them into Christianity. He was a slave trade owner who set up a pedophilia sex slave trade.
What people think about that? No, but you should, because we have adopted the ways of the Gentiles that has destroyed us. Let me read to you a piece of scripture that show you what the Most High says about the true children of Israel that were conquered and brought to these lands to work under these European conquerors. Let's go to the book of Hosea chapter 4 and read the 6th verse, and it reads, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will reject you, that you should be no priest to me, seeing you have forgotten the law of your power. I will also forget your children." Because we violated the first covenant, because we went against the Most High's laws, statutes, and commandments coming out of Egypt and being formed as a nation of Israel, historically, prophetically, the Most High allowed the European to come in and destroy us as a people. This is why Mr. Christopher Columbus could make that very statement that they must be made to work or serve as slaves, and they must adopt our ways. That is the very thing that happened. But let's continue on. Let's get another piece of history to see what this day is really, really honoring. Let's go to page 70 in the book, Not Just a Coincidence. Let me read something to you. It reads, he forced these peaceful natives to work in gold mines until they died of exhaustion. If an Indian worker did not deliver his full quota of gold dust by Columbus' deadline, soldiers would cut off the hands and tie them around his neck to send a message. Slavery was so intolerable for these sweet, gentle island people that at one point, 100 of them committed mass suicide. Now again, I want you to think about this. Christopher Columbus sailed and came over and landed in South America, in Brazil, in the Bahamas, so on and so forth. And he enslaved these people. He forced them to work at their toil, at their destruction. Why? So he could get rich. But again, he actually knew history. He said in 2nd Ezra that the 10 tribes are not there. We know where they are at. Queen Isabella, Ferdinand, give me the funding. I'll go find them and I will conquer them. Now, the interesting thing, historically, in 1492, Queen Isabella and Ferdinand actually kicked out those Hebrew Israelites that were ruling in Europe during the time of the Moorish Empire from 711 to 1492. They forced them up out of Spanish, Portuguese, and various other European lands down into Northwest Africa. What is known and had become the Renaissance period, or the Reconquista, the reconquest of Europe.
All right, so back in the day, there's a place called the Iberian Peninsula. Nowadays, we call it Spain and Portugal, but back then, it was the Iberian Peninsula, okay? Now, back in the day, we're talking about it's ruled by Christians, specifically Goths. Now, these aren't the Goths you're thinking of. It's just what they were called. And they happen to be Christian, right? Now, the Christians get kicked out of the Iberian Peninsula by a group of Muslims called the Moors. Now, problem is, the Moors don't finish the job. The Christian Goths, some of them anyway, they actually escape to the mountains, to the foothills of the Iberian Peninsula, and that's where they wait, and they plot their revenge, and they do it for like 800 years. And this is what we call the Reconquista, which is a lot more fun to say than it was to endure, because it's basically this 800-year process of the Christians trying to take back the Iberian Peninsula, and eventually they actually pull it off. 800 or so years after they've been kicked out, they managed to wrest power back from the Muslims that had taken it over. So there are two people that are basically in charge, Ferdinand and Isabella, and they were sort of the 1492 version of the power couple. They were ruling together, and most importantly, they were both very, very Catholic. Now, what they were worried about is that all the people that they had just taken over the Iberian Peninsula from, because see, some of them weren't Catholic, some of them were still Jewish.
Now, as the so-called Hebrews that were ruling the Moorish Empire were kicked down into Northwest Africa, here comes Mr. Christopher Columbus to find the other 10 tribes to conquer them. This is a very interesting thing because this is showing you that prophecy came to pass. But let's continue reading. On his second trip to the New World, Columbus brought cannons and attack dogs. Now notice this, he didn't just come one time. He came a second and also a third time. It says on his second trip to the New World, Columbus brought cannons and attack dogs. Why did he have to do that if he was just coming over here in peace? Think about this. So why is the European celebrating this day as if it was a great thing in history when it was really, again, a thing of conquest, murder, and complete domination of this earth? But let's continue reading. If a native resisted slavery, he would cut off a nose or an ear. If slaves tried to escape, Columbus had them burned alive. What does this sound like? Sounds like the very thing that the so-called Negro had to endure when being brought over here during the transatlantic slave trade. You got it. You know why? Because we were suffering the very same curse that many of these natives were suffering, because we are indeed brothers. We have suffered the same fate because the very curses of the Most High Yahweh is upon us for not keeping his laws, statutes, and commandments. But let's continue on. If Spaniards ran short of meat to feed the dogs, Arawak babies were killed for dog food. Yes, the so-called Arawak tribe or nation were actually destroyed and fed to these Europeans' dogs. Think about that. So this is what Columbus Day is actually celebrating? You bet. But let's continue on. It says Columbus' acts of cruelty were so unspeakable and so legendary even in his own day that Governor Francisco de Bobadilla arrested Columbus and his two brothers, slapped them into chains, and shipped them off to Spain to answer for their crimes against the Arawaks. But notice, but the King and Queen of Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand, their treasury filled with gold, pardoned Columbus and let him go free. One of Columbus' men, Bartholomew de las Casas, was so mortified by Columbus' brutal atrocities against the native peoples that he quit working for Columbus and became a Catholic priest. He described how the Spaniards under Columbus' command cut off the legs of children who ran from them to test the sharpness of their blades. Notice that. It goes on to say, de las Casas spent the rest of his life trying to protect the helpless native people, but after a while, there was no more natives to protect. Experts generally agree that before 1492, the population on the island of Hispaniola probably numbered above 3 million. Within 20 years of Spanish arrival, it was reduced to only 60,000. Notice that. Now, what is this? What is the European actually celebrating with so-called Columbus Day? He is celebrating the destruction of this entire earth and conquering of this entire planet under his hand. This is what he's really celebrating. So-called black man, woman, and child, so-called Indian, so-called Hispanic that have roots in slavery and destruction and conquering. You should not honor this thing at all. At all. Because it has nothing to do with righteousness and everything to do with the barbaric conquering of this Roman Empire beast system. But let me get a scripture. Let me go to the book of Daniel, the 7th chapter, and pick it up at the 7th chapter and the 23rd verse. Let's see what it has to say about this prophecy. Was this written about? You bet your bottom dollar. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth. So Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar was given a dream of 4 ruling empires to come into this earth. Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, and eventually the Roman Empire will be the last ruling empire before Hamashiach Yahushua, whom the world ignorantly under these Romans call Jesus Christ. That ain't his name. But the true and living Mashiach, the Messiah, the Lamb, wouldn't come until this fourth beast would come and devour the entire planet. But let's continue reading. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and tread it down, and break it into pieces. And this is exactly what this Roman Empire has done. Again, this is why the Roman Catholic Church commissioned the Knights of Columbus to commission the President of the said United States of America to make this a holiday to honor the very deed that they have done. They have broken this earth in pieces. They have took the children of Israel as captives, and now they rule this thing with a rod of iron. But our big brother is on his way to destroy this empire and this kingdom, and they will indeed pay for what they have done. But let's continue on. Let's go to the book of Psalms 49. Because the European, again, they love to celebrate what their forefathers have done. Let's see what the Most High said, the book of Psalms, chapter 49 and verse 11. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. And this is exactly what the European does. They think that they're going to rule this thing forevermore. But they got another thing coming. But it also says that they take lands and name them after their own names. That's right. America is named after who? Amerigo Vespucci. Africa, named after who? Another European, another Roman, Leo Scipio Africanus. And here it is, you got the so-called Negro calling himself an African American, putting on names of two Europeans, right? But let's continue. Think about that. Let's continue on. Nevertheless, man being in honor abides not. The European right now is in honor. He controls the resources. He controls the finances. He controls everything that goes on in the media, everything that goes on in the world. But they being in honor, as it says, they abide not. He is like the beast that perish. That's right. So when you read in the book of Daniel, and it calls this fourth empire a beast, you're going to perish. One day, what this nation, this empire has done to this earth is going to come up for a recompense. And especially what they have done to us, the true children of Israel. But let's continue on. Verse 13. This their way is their folly, that their posterity approve their sayings. Salah. In the Hebrew, salah means to pause and think. So it says that their posterity or their children approve their sayings. So again, when these so-called holidays, especially like Columbus Day, comes up, it is an honor of these Europeans, of their forefathers, and what they have done in conquering this earth. But when you know the history that these people were so barbaric and treated peaceable people, enslaving them, and then bringing their brothers from the west coast of Africa to enslave them, that should make you think. If you are a Gentile and you're seeing this thing and you read this history, it should make you repent and ask the true and living power to forgive you and your forefathers, not to celebrate their sayings as the scripture says. Because your people will pay indeed for what they have done. But let's continue on. Let's go to the book of Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk, and let's see what he has to say. Let's see what the Spirit of the Most High moved him to say in regards to an empire, building an empire on wickedness. The book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, and we'll pick this up at verse 12. And it reads, Woe to him that builds a town with blood and establishes a city by iniquity. Let me read that again. Woe to him that builds a town with blood and establishes a city by iniquity. Woe unto Christopher Columbus. Woe unto the conquistadors. Woe unto those so-called pilgrims and so-called European immigrants that came over here to dominate the Western Hemisphere. They have built this place by blood, not by democracy, not by diplomacy, not by peace treaties, because every treaty that they made with the so-called Indian, they have broken, okay? And then they enslaved our people and then so-called let us free and still have their boots on our backs to this very day. They have to pay for all of the bloodshed, all of the evil, all of the murder that they have done, and they will pay at the hands of the Most High. He has promised that judgment indeed will come, and you're seeing it. This is why you look at the west coast of America and it's on fire.
About 10, 15 minutes ago that some of this orange, yellow glow up on the hillside would be gone, but there's still a large stretch of it. Now things of late.
This is why hurricane after hurricane after hurricane is pounding the east and southeast coast. What did we do to deserve this? What did we so-called blacks and so-called natives that have true Israelite blood within them, what did we do to deserve such a thing? The book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, and we'll pick it up at the 15th verse. But it shall come to pass, if you will not listen to the voice of Yahweh your God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. That's right. You didn't keep the commandments. Therefore, the Most High said he was going to do this to you. Verse 49. The Most High shall bring a nation against you from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flies. Why did the European adopt the eagle as his national bird or his national symbol? Because it identifies who he is. But let's continue on. A nation whose tongue you shall not understand. A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. And this is indeed what has happened to us. The Most High allowed Christopher Columbus and all of those conquerors to come over here and put us in slavery and dominate finally the entire planet. As Daniel 7:23 said, they have broken the earth in pieces. They took Africa during the 19th century and carved it up for themselves. Well, the Danish, you can take this. The Dutch, you take this area. The French, you take this area. The English, you take this area. So on and so forth. For example, the English run South America, South so-called Africa, right? And then they had the nerve to go to war and get mad during the so-called apartheid era. When those indigenous people that dwelt on those lands began to rise up against their white slave masters, they had the nerve to get mad. But again, it just goes to show they are indeed the fourth beast power that was prophesied to take over this place. But let's see something. Let's turn over to the book of Zechariah, the 9th chapter. Let's get some hope in this situation, because this is going to end. Their celebrations of their conquering and evil will indeed come to an end. The book of Zechariah, chapter 9, and we'll pick this up at the 12th verse. Let's see what the Most High has stated. Zechariah, chapter 9 and verse 12. Turn you to the stronghold, you prisoners of hope. Yes, our stronghold is indeed the Most High Supreme, the true and living Creator who chose our forefathers. He said, turn to Him, you prisoners of hope. We hope every day, one day this thing will change for us. But it's going to change. But let's continue on. Even today do I declare that I will render double unto you. The Most High has promised that He's going to bless us double fold for what we have went through and when we truly repent and turn back to Him. Also, our enemies will be rendered double payment for the evil that they have done. But let's continue on. Verse 13. When I have bent Judah for me and filled the bow with Ephraim. So in other words, when He takes the house of Judah and the house of Ephraim, or all the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel, right? He said, and raise up your sons, O Zion. That's right. Israel will be raised up again to its proper honor. But first we must turn back to the Most High. First we must learn to keep His laws, His statutes and commandments, so we can get this might and power back from Him. But notice what it says. Against your sons, O Greece, and made you as the sword of a mighty man. Notice that. So we're coming up against the sons of Greece, against the sons of the Romans, the Spaniard, the French, the Dutch, the English, the German, so on and so forth. This fourth beast will have to tangle with the revived Israelite empire under our big brother Yahweh HaMashiach, the Lamb who laid His blood down. Right? Verse 14. And the Most High shall be seen over them, and His arrows shall go forth as lightning. And the Most High shall blow the trumpet, and shall go with whirlwinds of the south. So when the Most High sends His dear and beloved Son, who comes in His name, and brings back His brothers to Him, and gathers this mighty army, we're coming for battle. Judgment will be paid for the evil that has been committed in this earth. Let's close this out with verse 16. And the Most High their God shall save them in that day as the flock of His people, for they shall be as the stones of a crown lifted up as an ensign upon His land. So guess what? That's the so-called Negro. That's the so-called Indian, so-called Afro-Hispanic. That's your future if you can turn back to the Most High. He said that you will be counted as crowns in a stone, as jewelry. Didn't so-called Hitler say that the so-called Jew, the so-called European, has stolen the jewelry of God? Because he knew that we were the true children of Israel. So we have a future. We have salvation coming. So when we see that these Europeans and these Gentiles are celebrating their domination of the earth, their domination of us, don't get mad. Just turn to your power, your stronghold, and repent. And for you Gentiles, we suggest you do the very same thing. Maybe the Most High may have mercy on you. But your forefathers and and their children will pay. Understand that. So with that, we close out. May the Most High continue to be with you. Stay strong in this final hour in the face of adversity. Shalom.
We coming out of Babylon, Babylon, Babylon.
Spiritually, mentally, physically.
We coming out of Babylon.
Fleeing from her iniquities.
We coming out of Babylon, Babylon, Babylon.
Spiritually, mentally, physically.
We coming out of Babylon.